I want to just answer Red Room Diecast's question. Did Tim Pool ever respond to your Bulldog video? No. No, he didn't. And he really probably should have. Because now he's fucking pissed me off. Now he's pissed me off. And now I just don't care anymore. Because you know why a lot of creators haven't talked about the stuff related to Tim Pool is they all want to kiss his ass. I no longer care. Because he didn't cover the Bulldog video. And he's never followed up on it since. So, too bad, so sad. Whatever happens, happens. I ain't gonna take responsibility for it. All right, I want to go back. Oh, speaking of Tim Pool, you know, he claims to be a milquetoast fence sitter. He claims that his audiences are libertarian. But why is he speaking at a Turning Point event if his goal is really to appeal to libertarians? You know, I brought this graphic up originally. This is on Charlie Kirk's Twitter. This is talking about like the next Turning Point conference. I brought this graphic up originally to show you the amount of people that Turning Point flies in for one of their conferences. I didn't even realize Tim Pool was on this graphic until about 2 seconds before I went live, and I was like, "Oh, okay. Okay." And that's going to become important in a second. But where this started off is today, Charlie Kirk, and he's been doing this for a couple days. He tweeted out about 8 hours ago, "I miss politics where the better arguments and the hardest working candidates won elected office. Now it's a matter of which political machine can capture the most votes in a 30-day window. So be it. We will now have to beat the left at their game." And I'm like, you know what? Breaking news. Conservatives have discovered, finally and at long last, that winning elections requires getting votes. Maybe we have finally departed from the time where conservatives hold people up to purity test standards, where conservatives tweet things like, "Get out of our party, you're not wanted here," where conservatives tweet things like, "Libertarians are not conservative," because every time they do this shit, they drive away voters. You would think that that might be the epiphany that Charlie Kirk would have, right? It's like, you know what? If we're pissing people off and spitting in their face and not making our side appealing, maybe people won't vote for us. I don't know, guys. Like maybe it's just like I just have a hunch that if we weren't telling people that we didn't want them in our party, that maybe they might consider voting for us. We could actually win them on the battleground of ideas. But no, it really just seems like Charlie Kirk is doubling down on ballot harvesting. Okay. He tweeted this yesterday. "The Rubicon has been crossed. I don't like it, but it's time to win. We will build the most sophisticated and aggressive legal ballot harvesting operation in America and never let this garbage happen again." And then he also tweeted this interview with this gentleman, "Important lessons from Pastor Rob McCoy on ballot harvesting." You know, my perception of Turning Point USA is that the whole entire point of Turning Point USA was not to create a giant ballot harvesting operation, although I suppose fine if they want to do that. I guess I'm not really judging that. But it was my impression that the whole point of Turning Point USA was to turn out the youth vote in favor of conservatives, to go onto college campuses, to set up programs in high school, to make sure that there was a counterbalance to the indoctrination of the left. And if that's really the goal, I actually think that that's a noble one. Even though, like, I'm not voting for them, but, like, I actually think that that's a noble goal that makes sense. The problem is that Turning Point USA is not doing the things that it claims to do. And I don't think that this really, like, it should be shocking to anyone. Listen, I toured with the Walkaway campaign for 6 months, right? I will tell you that Turning Point USA has probably 10 to 20 times more money than the Walkaway campaign did. That's not an exaggeration. Every major donor in the conservative space, and by major donors, I mean the really big ones. We're talking about the six-figure checks, the seven-figure checks, things like that. Every major donor in the conservative space donates to Turning Point USA. They have an ungodly amount of money to work with. But it doesn't really seem like they're investing their money in the right areas to be able to accomplish the mission that they claim to have, which again was to turn out the youth vote. And I think it's worth considering for just a moment the criticism that one of their mortal enemies has, which is MSNBC. And again, I'm not suggesting that MSNBC is a credible news source at all, but a broken clock is right twice a day. And I think that this is a fair point. MSNBC tweeted out the other day, Turning Point USA, a group created to attract young conservatives, has taken in millions from donors with little to show for it. Let's just read. This is from the Readout blog. Unsurprisingly, the GOP's youth whisperers failed in the midterms. Republicans didn't achieve anywhere near the success they had hoped to achieve in this year's midterm election, in spite of historical trends suggesting the GOP, as the out party facing an incumbent president, would have the upper hand. Ultimately, younger voters played a larger role. As a CNN analysis found, a look at the data suggests there probably wasn't a surge in youth participation relative to the rest of the electorate, but it does suggest that Democrats defied election expectations this year because of a historically large age gap that saw younger voters overwhelmingly back Democratic candidates. In other words, young voters may not have turned out at historic levels in terms of sheer numbers, but the ones who turned out, by and large, weren't rocking with the Republican Party. What the ever-loving F was Turning Point USA doing with all that money if they weren't working on youth voter turnout? This is their one effing reason for being, is to turn out the youth vote for conservatives. What were they doing? Well, we're going to talk about that in a second because I have some numbers for people to consider. Turning Point USA is a prime example. The Arizona-based nonprofit, led by right-wing extremist Charlie Kirk, okay, I don't think he's a right-wing extremist, I think he's a jackass, I don't think he's an extremist, has been lauded by conservatives as the preeminent voice of young, budding conservative movement. Seemingly every Republican with hopes of winning an election or mere adoration from young people has kissed Kirk's ring and promoted themselves before Turning Point's audience. Donors have plunged millions of dollars into Kirk's operation with little to show for it. The organization, backed by a slate of election losers in the midterms, from extremist Senate candidate Blake Masters in Arizona to House candidate John Gibbs in Michigan, who once argued against women's suffrage. Peruse Kirk's Twitter feed over the past week, and you can see him go from being extremely bullish on the GOP's hopes for the midterms to extremely downtrodden and conspiratorial over his party's failures. I'm not going to comment on that, but I do think that the point that MSNBC is making here is incredibly, incredibly valid. Listen, I have been incredibly critical of the walkaway movement, particularly since I left it, because I no longer believe that the walkaway movement cares about getting Democrats to leave the party. There is absolutely no evidence that the walkaway movement is doing anything to get Democrats to leave the party. And just like there's no evidence of that, there's no evidence that Turning Point USA is gaining any ground at all in terms of the youth voter turnout. These are like two-pronged tactics. You're supposed to get Democrats to leave the party. That's not happening. You're supposed to get young people to actually go and vote conservative. That's not happening. Where are the donations going? What are they doing? And why isn't any conservative asking questions about this at all? Because we're talking about tens of millions of dollars. Betty White says, I heard Blexit had issues money-wise. Oh, don't even get me started on Blexit. How many events have you seen Blexit do? How many events have you seen them do? In 2020, and we actually talked about this a lot with walkaway people. In 2020, Blexit did one event. One. And do you know what that event did? They paid to fly people into Washington, D.C. to go to the White House, all wearing the same t shirt, and listen to Donald Trump give a speech. That was it. One of the reasons I involved myself with the walkaway movement in 2020 is they were literally the only organization out there trying to do anything during the pandemic. They were the only organization holding rallies. They were the only organization putting any effort at all into getting people excited. They were actually trying to be productive. I don't think they're productive anymore, but then they were. Blexit did one rally, singular, and they had to pay everyone that was there to attend. That's real. We're going to talk more about this in a second. I'm going to show you guys some stats, but I just want to just look at this article from The Guardian. And again, this is a biased news source. So this news source does not like Turning Point USA, but it still has some interesting information in it. Let's look at these highlights. Founded in 2012 by then 18-year-old Kirk and headquartered in Arizona, where it built a robust base, now backing Trump-endorsed candidates like a former Fox News star for governor. Turning Point USA's revenues have soared from 4.3 million in 2016 to almost 39.8 million in 2020, according to public tax filings. Turning Point USA boasts it has allies on more than 2,500 high school and college campuses and is the fastest growing youth organization in America. Then where were all the votes? And no, Ronald, no. I don't care. First of all, you guys have no evidence that there's fraud. There's zero evidence that there's fraud. But the point that you are making to deflect from the point that your influencers have failed you has nothing to do with the fact that Turning Point USA did not do its one and only job, which was to turn out youth votes. How much are the staff paid? Deborah is asking the right questions. So I found this. This is from March of 2021. And I didn't have time to look it up today, but we can get their tax filings. We can easily answer this question, but this seemed to do a pretty good job. Turning Point USA is a tax-exempt nonprofit 501c3 that advocates conservative principles on high school, college, and university campuses, in convention centers, blah, 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 established in 2012 by Charlie Kirk, who receives nearly $300,000 in compensation, flies first class, and has a discretionary spending account, as do all the officers, according to Form 990 submitted with the IRS. And the Form 990 that they're looking at is from 2019. We can get the Form 990 now. We can get the updated Form 990. These things are publicly available. No, Ronald, you have no evidence. You're just raging in the chat. Now, guys, I have two rules in my chat. Don't be a dick and no whining. If you want to keep whining, Ronald, you're more than welcome to keep whining, but I promise it's not going to go as well for you as you think it's going to go. So I'm going to suggest you stop. Don't be a dick, no whining. Otherwise, you won't be in my chat very long. I promise you that. Then show me the evidence, Dawn. Listen, right now we're talking about an actual quantifiable problem. If conservatives just want to go, fraud, me! That's what you want to do. You are never going to win another election again. Do you hear me? Oh, Ronald. Oh, I am, huh? I am. You're right. Well, you're blocked, buddy. Goodbye. If these are the tactics that you want to take, you are never going to win another election again. Never. This is an organization that is responsible for turning out conservative youth vote. And if you're more angry at me for declaring correctly that you have zero evidence of fraud than you are with Turning Point USA for taking in tens of millions of dollars of donations of your money and not doing anything with it, then your priorities are misplaced. The reason that Republicans lost the midterms is they stopped listening. They didn't listen on abortion at all. They rejected any evidence that this was going to come back and bite them in the ass. And they just screamed fraud all day. And then they said, there's no reason to even vote anyway. And they took their toys and went home. And then they lost and they wondered why. You lost because the Democrats fortified the election, wrote about it in Time magazine, told you exactly how they fortified the election. And instead of doing exactly what the Democrats did, you just read for years. 2 years the Republicans had to fix this problem. 2 years. They had the entire game plan laid out for them in Time magazine. Literally, all they had to do was copy exactly what the Democrats did. And they didn't even figure that out until today, apparently. They finally figured, oh, we just need to listen. Oh. Oh. But no, keep reading and calling me a narcissist for telling you the truth. Expenses were reported to be 25 million, but 7 million of expenses were to a grant to an affiliated organization, Turning Point USA Endowment, which operates out of the same office of Turning Point USA. Let's break down the expenses of Turning Point USA. 6.2 million, or 21% of their revenue, is spent on travel and conventions. Do you know what Turning Point USA does when they put on conferences like this? Do you know what they do? This is a giant suck of money. Every one of those speakers is going to receive compensation. Every single one of those speakers is going to receive first class travel. Every one of those speakers is going to be put up in a really expensive hotel. Every one of those speakers is going to be catered to. There's going to be a blown out party. These conferences are basically parties for conservative college students. That's what they're spending their money on. That's what the money is going to, is the parties. 20% of their revenue is spent on compensation, with Charlie Kirk getting $300,000 a year for doing what? What is he doing? 7% of their revenue is spent on printing, publications, and video and digital. 4% on office expenses, 4% on fees, 4% on other expenses, 1% on grants, 1% on advertising. What are they spending money on that is directly related to youth voter turnout? How are they turning out the youth vote? Do you see anything in this breakdown that indicates to you that Turning Point USA is doing their job? What I think Turning Point USA is doing is throwing parties and paying people wild salaries. Excuse me. Getting a cold. What are they doing? Tens of millions of dollars a year goes into this organization. And conservatives have literally nothing to show for it. And if you aren't asking questions about that, or if you're ignoring this and you're just screaming fraud, 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 when there is no evidence that fraud exists at all, then you're going to keep losing. One of the things that conservatives really suck at is holding their own tribe accountable. William of Essex says, we lost the youth vote by about 30 points in the midterms. Listen, I don't necessarily mind that Charlie Kirk has had the great epiphany that playing by the rules that the Democrats are playing by is maybe not the worst idea in the world. I don't mind that he's had this grand epiphany. However, has Charlie Kirk been self reflective at all about the utter failure of his organization to do the one and only thing that it was built to do? They threw parties. That was what they did. They threw parties and they paid themselves giant salaries and they went on their influencer speaking tours and they probably made even more money on their influencer speaking tours. But they did not do the one thing that they were supposed to do, and that is turn out the youth vote in favor of conservatives. And conservatives need to be asking why. You need to hold people like Charlie Kirk accountable for doing the things that they say they're going to do. And if you are not going to hold them accountable and say, Charlie, why did we lose by 30 points when we gave you $40 a year? $40 million. Because you promised us that you would set up all these chapters on high school and college campuses, and you promised us you would activate the youth vote. And the whole point that Turning Point is named Turning Point is because they were supposed to turn the youth vote in favor of the right. We gave you $40 million a year to do it. What did we get for that money? Those are the questions that need to be answered. Are any conservatives going to ask these? I don't know. I don't know. But I feel like I'm going to have a lot of in my comments saying, you're a horrible person. Well, I'm not even on your team, dude. And I think that these are fair questions to ask. Don't you? So if I were conservatives, these types of organizations that are doing nothing but lifting up their chief influencers and making sure their influencers have their nice podcasting studio and they're going on all the shows and they're doing the speaking tour and they're selling the books and they're being stars and celebrities in the conservative movement and they're followed around by groupies and entourages. I might demand some results from them. I'm just saying, I might demand some results. And if they don't give you results, then stop giving them your money. It's really that simple.